Redditors who had a bad feeling but stayed. What happened after? Most of us have experienced the sense of knowing things before we know them, even if we can't explain how. The Reddit user stories below will creep you out, so it's best to read these with a friend. Before we start, please make sure to subscribe to Starface Productions and hit the bell icon for more creepy updates in the future. Also, press the thumbs up button if you love our video. These are the Redditors who had a bad feeling but stayed. So, what happened after? Okay, so they didn't really stay, or else they wouldn't have answered. Let's proceed anyway. Somebody's Watching Me by DM Hollands 117. I was hiking down a trail and I felt like I was being watched. I've read a lot of stories about people going missing in the woods, so I was hyper aware of every little thing. Instead of going down this one path, I turned around and walked back. I still felt like I was being watched, so I power up my Bluetooth speaker, plug in my hiking MP3, and blast some heavy music. A few minutes later, the feeling passes. A day later, I heard someone was attacked by a mountain lion on the trail I was going to hike on. Similar situation for vykeengene. I had a similar story while out fishing in Montana. I was alone in the river. It was getting dark, but I had been catching some fish, so I stayed out a bit longer than I knew I should. At one point, I felt the sensation of someone watching me. The feeling kept growing stronger and I could smell an animal close by, so I decided to walk back across the river and get back to camp. That night I heard some strange moaning, cries from what sounded like a really big animal, but I couldn't really tell what it was. The next morning, someone at the camp next to me said that a mountain lion had given birth right next to her camp that night. I honestly feel lucky I wasn't attacked that night. Saved by OriginalIronDan. Not me, my mom. Dad was going to Greece on a golf and gambling trip. He went on these trips occasionally and always came back a winner. Came home from one with about $5,000 in 1975. He was packing his suitcase the day before the trip when my mom just straight up told him not to go. His friends had all canceled out for various reasons, so he didn't know anyone who was going. She'd never done that before. She wasn't controlling at all. They talked for a minute and Dad got on the phone and canceled. The plane he would have been on crashed into a mountain in Greece. No survivors. Here's an identical yet different story from Throw It Away 0121. I was a dumb 17-year-old. My friend Joe and I smoked weed a lot. One of the guys we brought it from, David, was in his early 30s, lived in a normal house, had a wife who he was not in the process of divorcing and not living with, and 1 or 2 young kids. But he sold a lot of stuff besides weed, pills, meth, etc. So he was involved with some sketchy people, but he was always really nice to us. A few times he fronted us weed when we couldn't afford it. One time I had had the worst day ever, and he just gave me some just to be nice. So needless to say, what happened to him really scared and upset me. One night, sometime between 9 to 10 p.m., Joe and I went over to get some weed. David told us he was waiting on his connection to drop it off. It would be an hour if he wanted to wait here. I said, yeah, sure, no big deal. But Joe said, no, I want to leave. I looked at him, surprised, and said, it's just an hour wait. By the time we drive home and come back, it will be an hour anyways. Joe said, no, I think we should leave. I just don't want to stay here. I asked him why, but he said he just got a bad feeling. I will admit, David did seem off. He seemed really nervous and tense. There was a girl I knew from school there. Like everyone bought weed from this guy. She decided to wait, but Joe didn't want to, so I left with Joe. About an hour or 2 later, we tried calling David. No answer. He never called back, so we just hung out and watched TV till the next morning. He still didn't answer, so we drove by there. We really wanted our weed. And the entire house is covered in crime scene tape. Part of the house is black and obvious there was an extremely recent fire that significantly damaged the home. We had no clue what happened and weren't about to stop and ask the cops there. I found out from the news and then from friends of ours what happened. Around 12 a.m., 3 guys kicked down the door. David and the girl I knew from school were sitting on the couch. They were both shot in the head and killed instantly. The guys then tried to set the house on fire to destroy any evidence, but a neighbor called the fire department shortly after they left, so the house wasn't badly burned enough to destroy much evidence. It took them years to catch the guys who did it. Tattoo Prank by Insane Knight. My old boss was an interesting guy. He came from a rough part of town and had a bunch of tattoos that really made him look scary, but he was actually a nice guy. I asked him about his massive chest tattoo, which led him to a story about his younger brother John. John was a pretty gentle guy, but he started hanging out with blokes from his hometown that wasn't exactly right in the head. One night, they all hanging around drinking, as they did most nights when one of the blokes breaks out some meth. John politely declines and just continues drinking. The energy was getting really weird. Guys breaking windows with their bare fists, bleeding all over the place, verbal abuse being hurled. Just an all-round wonderful atmosphere. At one point, someone broke out a tattoo gun and started doing home jobs. John really wanted to leave, but couldn't because he was quite drunk, so he had to stay. Someone ended up spiking his drink, so while he was blacked out, one of the guys tattooed a swastika on his forehead. Creepy Teacher by SpendLessLiveMore. In 5th grade, my math teacher made me and another girl stay after school. He said we did too well on the test, we must have cheated. I always got a weird feeling around him, but when it was just him and us, he was actually smelling our hair. When I finished my test, he told me to leave. There was no way that I was going to leave him alone with the other girl. I told him my dad said I had to walk home with the other girl. The teacher said I was lying. I was, but I told him to call my dad and tell my dad that he thought his daughter was a cheater and a liar. My dad was super friendly, but built like a grizzly bear. He let me wait for her to finish the tests. The Killing Joke by Abhikavi. I have a much milder story about being oblivious. The normal major weed connection in my city had been shut down and the supply was scarce. I was over at a party house, the kind where everyone living there smokes a shitload of weed. And some of the guys there had brought in a new dealer and he was there with some of his friends. I was there waiting for my friends who were unexpectedly out. The dealer was just a dick. That was the summation of my gut feeling about him. I didn't like him and decided to make it known by cracking jokes at his expense. Most of them were on the theme of him having a tiny dick. I did notice that everyone in the room was silent until the dealer laughed, and once they did, everyone else would laugh. The atmosphere of the room was really weird, but I chalked it up to tension from meeting new people. Anyway, after he left, someone laughed really nervously and told me I had a huge set of balls. Apparently, this dealer was a part of a local gang. The house was in what I'd call a shooty-stabby kind of neighborhood and was known to have a very short fuse. My friends disagreed with using his services at all, which is why they'd been out. Wish they'd warned me. The other guys who'd been there thought I was going to get them all shot with my stupid jokes. Good thing the dickhead was able to laugh at himself at least a little, I guess. Another drug-related story by FeatsOfStrength. I got invited to a party by some random guy I met outside a club. I went to said party with him as I was drunk and thought, sure, why not? This entailed going to a run-down house in a council estate, the UK equivalent of a project, I guess. To enter the house, we had to climb in through a window where there were 5 people sat in a circle made of half-broken chairs and a moldy couch. After entering the window, the guy locked it behind him. It was at this point I instantly felt sober again and realized that something was wrong. That's when the crack cocaine and heroin came out. A woman who was part of the circle, who apparently owned the house, started telling a story about how her husband had hung himself in the stairwell. Her kids had been taken away, and that she kept a sharpened screwdriver under her pillow in case they came for her. I was well past wanting to leave at this point. I didn't have an escape though, and my nervousness showed. That's when paranoia set in within the circle. The guy who had brought me there had become incredibly tense. The slightest noise and he would flip out. He stood by the curtains, peeping through, mumbling to himself about the police watching him. I had to prove I wasn't wearing a wire at this point. Before long, however, the drugs began to run out. This made the paranoia be temporarily forgotten. I saw a chance here and said I had money and I could buy more drugs. The guy said he would book a taxi for us to go in. About 15 minutes later, a taxi turned up. He unlocked the window and I jumped out first and slammed it shut behind me, ran as fast as I could towards the taxi, jumped in the front seat and just shouted, "Drive, drive," to the taxi driver who took off down the street and to the safety of home. Closest I've ever felt to being murdered. That's all, folks. If you have any similar real-life experiences just like them, just leave a comment down below. Also, subscribe to Starface Productions, hit the bell icon, and give our video a thumbs up. Bye guys!